G'day legends, happy Monday or happy Sunday afternoon, wherever you are. I hope that you're having a fantastic day and a fantastic week. Now, as always, we have a lot to go over. So, of course, we'll look at the maps and we'll look at the developing situation in some areas of the front and how that will affect then further down the line. We also need to have a look at some strikes, both on a train and on drones coming into Ukraine as well. But, of course, we can't ignore the main news of the day, which, of course, Biden has pulled out, and he has then endorsed his vice president, Kamala Harris. Now, I personally think this is actually further cementing the likelihood of a Trump victory. That said, it's no lie that I'm not some American political speaker. But I do believe people are seeing this as a more volatile future that is potentially coming. I think a lot of people think that they can't imagine Kamala being the leader in a wartime environment with other leaders like Xi Jinping and Putin. How would that actually look? Would she just get walked all over? But how does this then affect global politics and the war in Ukraine? And that is exactly what we're going to then speak about today. Now, she has then taken this endorsement as well on behalf of the American people. I thank Joe Biden for his extraordinary leadership as President of the United States and his decades of service to the country. I'm honoured to have the President's endorsement, and my intention is to earn and win this nomination. So it will be very interesting to see how that goes. Now, of course, she's not the Democrats' nominee yet. There's other people in the run, but it is looking like the favourite, as she can still take that funding given to the Biden-Harris ticket. But let's talk about how things may change. And we have seen a major change in the reporting, the messaging, the comments coming out of Kyiv and especially out of Volodymyr Zelensky about the subject of peace, negotiations, ending the, quote, hot war. So let's have a look over that and let's have a look at how this may all tie in and other, I believe, inevitable conflicts around the world that may be influencing this decision as well. So we had these over the last couple of days, and we've spoken about this, but this was mainly in an interview with the BBC. So this is Zelensky saying that persuaded to sit down and end the war, put pressure on Russia, saying it doesn't mean that all territories are won back by force. I think the power of diplomacy can help. Adding the weaker Russia on the battlefield would put Ukraine in a stronger position on the negotiating table. But by putting pressure on Russia, I think it's possible to agree to a diplomatic settlement. Now, my question is in this, what more pressure are you putting on Russia rather than military victories on the battlefield? Everything basically has been sanctioned. That hasn't worked as much. We know with China that they are not looking for military influence one way or another. They want to then end the war. So I don't think there's going to be much success there, not by the end of the year. Anyway, what more can come in the next few months by the end of the year to then persuade this? Now, people are saying, oh, you could just deploy 100 F-35s. That's not going to come in by the end of the year. It's not going to be done by then. If you were to do that, well, an F-35 is a significantly more complex aircraft than an F-16. We've already seen how long the F-16s are taking. Well, we don't actually know how long it's taking yet because we haven't seen them yet. That would be years and years, probably, to actually have them up and working in everything that's combining that, probably a decade minimum, meaning for all the maintenance. Anyway, what is actually going to be the pressure there? One of the diplomatic things in this war is it's become existential for Russia. So then the amount of sway actually, I believe, has reduced with the other markets being found. But saying as well, and these are just comments, we've spoken about these, but it's just setting the scene. I believe that if we're united to follow, for example, the format of the peace summit, we can end the hot stage of the war. We can try to do it by the end of this year. But if you follow the format of the peace summit from the one before, you won't have Russia or China attend if, quote, they buy realistic on the ground, nor will you have senior diplomats from India or a uniting of the global south. It has to be done differently. You don't try the same thing again. But Zelensky apparently has a plan, and he says the plan will be ready, and if it leads to the end of the hot stage of the war, it will be very right and powerful. So by the end of this year, I can't see any plan put forward that would end the hot stage of the war that doesn't have a form of land concessions. I just don't, I personally don't see that. And I've said a million times, the only way Ukraine gets all of this land back, including Crimea, is by military victory, by military power, if that is then possible, both manpower and the amount that the West is willing to give in as well. Now, of course, like I've said, the messaging is changing then significantly. So we get things like then this today. This was from BBC as well, but then Kyiv Independent has this specific one. If one person in the world, and this person is Donald Trump, we can stop the war in 24 hours. The question is, at what price and who will pay? At what price means it's going to the negotiating table, and at this point in time, Russia has the initiative, and I believe they have more cards on said table. Does Ukraine have cards on the table as well? Absolutely. Does the West have cards on the table? Absolutely. But the war is moving forward, and it is domestically funded by Russia. I believe they have, for their side, I believe that they have more cards on the table, especially when we're talking about partnerships, working relationships into the future, and some inevitable conflicts there. A simple way to achieve 24-hour peace would be to force Ukraine to make territorial concessions and drop its sanctions on Russia. But no one in the world could force Ukraine to do this, Zelensky said. That is incorrect. The US could force Ukraine to do this. I'm sorry. People say, but NATO, the majority of NATO's power, the majority of NATO's diplomatic power around the world and military power around the world is the US. Like it or not, the US can start and stop this war as it chooses. And that could have, of course, have a huge sway depending on who is then the next leader of the US. And it's left people asking this about, what about the 2025 offensive that we have been spoken about? 2025 offensive, what's coming, F-16s, this and that. And people are asking, well, what has then occurred to that? Is that still going to go ahead? And I have said then before that if there was going to be some massive 2025 offensive, we needed to see the equipment coming in now, the training being conducted now, and the mobilisation being conducted then a few months ago. And that's not based off what I'm just pulling out of my ass. That's coming off guys I'm speaking to then on the front, fully on that. You can go back a few videos and have a look. Now, with this Trump, Biden, Kamala thing, what I will say is bloggers, news, individuals, everyone will do all in their power to undermine the candidate that they don't like, probably especially in this space that we talk about Trump. So what I will say is just keep your head on a swivel, know when someone's reporting news, and know when someone is trying to then influence then your opinion. But in my opinion, whether it be blue or red, I think that there is inevitably going to be a war with the eye guys in the Middle East. I don't know if I can say it. Maybe I can show the country here. No one talks about this on YouTube because you get restricted like that if you do talk about it. And then that, of course, would have further destabilization in the Middle East. And I think personally, behind closed doors, the West wants to draw Russia back into some level of working relationship, some level of sphere of influence, maybe economically, before this occurs. Because we know the further that relationship grows apart, the closer relationships with the I country and the C country then come together, especially the I country and their goals of a nuclear program. Now, my personal thoughts on this for Ukraine and Russia is anything short of a full territorial loss for Ukraine is actually a victory. If you look at, in the beginning of this war, what the American intelligence agencies, what everyone was saying, that the 3 days, the week, the 2 weeks that Ukraine would fall, anything less than that, I think should actually be seen as a victory. But politicians, bloggers, media have got in everyone's head that anything but the 1991 borders are then a loss. Now, militarily, how realistic ever was this? Especially then if we have a look at the tactical nature of what it would take to take back somewhere like Crimea when it is occupied and how that would actually look on the ground. And could a victory there be Pyrrhic? Now, one of my concerns lies in that tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, have died in this war. And they have lost many soldiers, many friends, many relatives on the promise that their sacrifice was given so that all of this land, the 1991 borders, would be returned. Now, Ukraine has a very strong militia, paramilitary groups, and I know people that are obsessed with this idea of a Russian internal rebellion, then collapse. But I do think that this is a threat in Ukraine as well. If there is some level of land capitulation, that we may see those groups, some of which have radical ideology, that have been fighting specifically for this goal and the return of these areas, who have had huge losses due to sacrifice of doing this. If that then gets taken away, I'll be very interested to see what actually then occurs within Ukraine. And also on that, on not a military sense, but people then returning back from Europe or other areas of the world as refugees, if where they live is now occupied, or if Ukraine hasn't then achieved what it set out as its goals. And with all of this, if there was some level of land concession, I don't know how it then fares for NATO and EU membership and other promises given, because all of this was given on the idea of a Ukrainian military victory, and that victory was very clearly stated of a return to 1991 borders. Now, like I've said, I don't believe that a victory needs to be that. I think anything short, if you think about before the start of this war, what we thought Russia would have in Ukraine if they invaded, I think we would have had a very different idea of it. If you can stop the Russians, if you can walk away with still the vast majority, that should be seen as a victory. Now, I'm not saying to be happy about it, but militarily, we expected Russia to walk then across. But as I've stated before, this war does not end without, militarily at least, doesn't end without 1 million dead. And in my opinion, the amount of forces that would be needed to have a real shot at Crimea, a real shot at Donetsk, or on the other hand, a real shot at Kharkiv, at Kyiv, at Lviv, would require so much larger of a mobilization than we have seen. And for Ukraine, the weapons donations we've seen, the amount of training, the amount of mobilization that we've seen aren't conclusive in my mind to say that this is in the at least short-term near future, because realistically they need a minimum of a year to do that, and all of this should have been done at least 1, 2, 3 months ago. But what I will say, if you want to help, or you're saying that Ukraine need to mobilise, you can go and sign up. You don't need a military background. Plenty of people are there without fighting, and plenty of people are sitting on Twitter who are young, fit, healthy, and could then help, but then they won't. Now, let's talk about some other comments from Kyiv Mayor and Zelensky as well. So, the Kyiv Mayor, Vitaly Klitschko, in an interview said that Volodymyr Zelensky will likely need to hold a public referendum before agreeing to any territorial compromises. The next few months will be very difficult for Zelensky should he continue the war with new deaths and destructions, or consider a territorial compromise with Putin. So it's an impossible decision. What do you do? More death, more destruction, or then a compromise? Now, how can we explain to the country that we need to give up pieces of territory that cost lives of thousands of our fighting heroes? Whatever move he makes, our president risks political suicide. Zelensky will probably need to resort to a referendum. I don't think he can reach such painful, important agreements on his own without popular legitimization. Of course, Zelensky at the moment, due to martial law, is not elected in. He is being grandfathered on from then his elected presidency. And we also need to talk about that a poll published by the Kyiv Institute of Research of seeing who's opposed to making territorial concessions is down from 84% who are in May, and that number has been dropping and dropping. We talk about that on here. Because elections are impossible, Klitschko pushed for a creation of a national unity government to avoid having all important choices regulated to the president's office. This is one of the biggest criticisms within Ukrainian politics, is other political parties have been banned, and under martial law, that everything is done internally in Zelensky's office, in his party, and then outside influence has been minimized, especially without then a vote or referendum. Now, this then continues. Zelensky emphasized that many factors make holding fair elections challenging during the war. But in any case, if the war drags on, it will be necessary to look for new tools. Saying, firstly, no one will agree to a war that will continue for another 10 years or many years. Now, NATO Secretary Jens Stoltenberg has recently said in the past, I want to say 3 days, I think it's in the title of my video, that they're preparing for another 10 years of war, describing this scenario as impossible. Holding elections, however, would be difficult and require change in the constitution due to martial law. Another complication would be how to ensure free and fair elections, given there are people living in occupied territories, Ukrainians serving in trenches, and millions of Ukrainians abroad. Now, my solution to that, and I've said this exactly before, is out of an outtake of the book War is a Racket, is that you have a limited referendum. You don't have a vote of everyone. You don't have a referendum of everyone. Your referendum at wartime is limited to those who could be then mobilized. So in Ukraine's case, the mobilization is 25 to 60, or whatever it is. Therefore, they are the people that then actually vote in the referendum. It cuts down a hell of a lot that you don't have. And I know this may be undemocratic, but mobilizing people against their will is undemocratic too. Of course, then you'd have to widen that, because as the war will continue, therefore young men will come into that then mobilization age. So if you just did 18 to 60 of the men that then can't leave, I believe that is where your referendum should lie, and that would be significantly easier. Now, is there problems with this? Yes. Is there problems with any of this? Yes. It's wartime. It's then not easy. Now, let's look at what Zelensky has said in more of this interview as well. Now, what I'm trying to show here is how then the messaging has then significantly changed. Partners who will be pressing on Russia, and this is where the first peace conference fell over, was it didn't unite the countries that would have an influence on Russia. It united the countries that have already sanctioned the shit out of Russia. Now, realistically, the only country here is China, and we already know where China then stand on this. Does not mean that all territories must be recaptured. I think the power of diplomacy might help.
Так, треба бути сильними на полі бою. Бажано не відступати, бажано стояти, а ще бажаніше провести якісь кроки, які послаблять Росію. Вона почне відступати, послаблять.
So steps forced her, not move back, steps to strengthen Ukraine, to put pressure on Russia on the battlefield and force it to retreat. But what I've been saying is, if this is going to take place by the end of this year, that is not long enough to bring in new weapons, new mobilization. Remember, the fighting season of this war only has a few months left before it is then too cold.
На полі бою. Це просто дасть вам більш сильніші позиції за столом перемовин. Але це не значить, що треба повертати всі.
That doesn't mean all territories should be returned with weapons only, putting Ukraine in a better position at the negotiating table. Like I've spoken about, I don't believe that areas like Donetsk, Crimea, can be taken any way diplomatically, only militarily.
Території виключно зброю, сила дипломатії, сила і перевага всього світу, пушень Росію, тиснучи Росію, можна, я вважаю, можна домовитись про...
Agreeing to a diplomatic solution if the entire world push on Russia. The thing is, the whole world here is speaking about the West, and they've already been doing this. We'll have a look at then who signed the communique for the first peace summit, and you can see that it is already the countries of which we expected that it did fail to rally up that global south. I can't see, if you are saying that we need an end to this war, the hot stage of this war this year, that is not going to include all the territories occupied. What are you going to bring to the table that will then force a Russian retreat while they have then the initiative on the battlefield, while Ukraine is still facing mobilization, weapon shortages, and a a domestic supply of weapons. And like I've said, America can influence this war to end and start and go left or go right 100%. Not only is the money funding significantly from weapons to salaries from the US, then the intelligence, all of that as well. It'll be very interesting to see which side gets in and how this war continues. But I think this may be a plan B, and the reason this messaging is getting put out because Trump is the favourite. Now let's have a look at a couple of strikes. We have this footage here of a Russian Shahed being taken down by Ukrainian air defences here as well. And we do know that Russia had a mass Shahed drone attack overnight. Ukraine has said that they've shot down the majority. Russia has said that it has struck energy facilities. Of course, with any of this, it is impossible to know because of the laws in Ukraine around reporting of strikes from drones or missiles or anything. It's impossible to then know, as well as we question the reporting around how many of weapon systems are, how successful air defense is as well. Because, of course, we know that the second line of war is the informational, then space. And then at this geolocation here, so just, if we have a look, just to the west of then Kramatorsk, to the south of Kharkiv, we then see that 2 Iskanders have struck a Ukrainian train. Now, we know over the past month or two, there has been multiple trains struck by Russian Iskanders, of course, with these drones in the air acting as an ISR asset as well. And then we can see the first Iskander here. Now, again, we don't have an update on exactly what the damage was from here, but we know that these drones this year have been operating significantly more successfully than well behind the line, of course, then guiding in these Iskanders much more successfully as well than for what we had seen for the first year, 2 years of war. And you can see then a second Iskander strike. So again, we are unsure on what the battle damage assessment actually then was of that. I don't know why the drones don't stick around and show us exactly then after. Now, let's have a look at the map. So here's Ukraine, the center, the capital of Kyiv. The red areas occupied since 22, the purple since 2014. Now, the red check, that is showing us areas that have moved in the last 24 hours, and we do have some of these. Now, this is the developing concerning situation around the New York Toretsk front that is causing a lot of pressure on the last 2014 lines that exist in Ukraine. Of course, the 2014 line is anything in purple, and we have seen this move out from it. So the last lines in here sit between New York and Toretsk in here, and that Russia, with this maneuver, is then closing up and putting pressure on the remaining Ukrainian lines in here. What they are doing is what we have seen out from Osheretny or in many other fronts. This push up and expand out in areas exactly like we are seeing now in New York, exactly like we've seen in Zelensky on then the Toretsk front here. And we're seeing this out to the west as well, pushing out near Alexandropol as well. And I do believe we may see this area then close up rapidly if it becomes unobtainable to actually then hold positions in here. This is a developing area. We've been saying it for weeks. You just need to keep an eye on what exactly is occurring down in here. Now, we just need to come up to the north of here a little bit, and where we've seen that there was a tactical pause for a while and then a restart of this Chasiv Yar front, the Bakhmut front in here. And what we can see is today to the north of Boronivka that Russia has filled in some of this location here. Now, what I've been saying is that I believe Russia will want to fill in more of this up to then the water canal that runs through here before we have a crossing en masse. Has there been crossings of this? Yes, but I think before we see a crossing en masse, they'll want to close up more of this territory, not to get overextended in this front, and we're seeing this. Now, what I will say here, this is why we have Syriac, and this bit of ground here has been shown on Syriac maps for a number of days, and now this map is catching up there. That's why we use then multiple different maps. Now, let's come up into the north. Now, no changes are shown on this map, but we do have a Syriac. This is still showing a disconnect of the Russian forces up in here. I don't know if this will load, but regardless, situation on Northern Front. From Chuv axis, during last week, Ukrainian army reversed Russian gains northeast of the town of Vovchansk Meanwhile, the Russian army took control over new high buildings in the northern part of the town. So it is saying that, Russia has had some level of cross out into then the southern part over the Vovcha River. We're not sure exactly on that, but it is saying out to the east. It's not showing it. Oh, yeah, sorry, it is showing it just out in this location that Ukraine has had an advancement, but also showing Russia has had some level down in here as well. Again, it's hard to confirm because the maps in here, maps in urban centres where it's block by block and can change in a matter of minutes or hours, it's very hard to say exactly then what is occurring. We'll come down then into the Avdiivka front. No changes shown on this map, although we have spoken about this envelopment happening here as well. But let's have a look then at Syriac and where his map updates are sitting. Now, what he's showing on this, which I believe to be true, I would say, is that Ukraine has had a forced withdrawal out of this then envelopment in here. Now, if we just look at this realistically and we talk about that what is open is less than, say, a kilometre, so it's 800 metres, and that's being probably very generous. Let's just go from grey zone. We're talking 300 metres. If anyone's ever shot a weapon, you know that that is nothing, and this is very open, flat terrain here. That is probably then closed up. And Syriac is saying, following the withdrawal of Ukrainian army, the trench system between here and Prohez was taken by the Russian army. And what this then does is it closes from Russia having a front line that is this long to Russia having a front line which is this long. Of course, what that means is that your troops and your fires are less dispersed. Therefore, you can bring more weapons to bear on a shorter front line. I think that's what Russia will continue to try and do on this front, is that sausage, bubble out and close up other territories, especially the open ground in here. Now, we just need to come down to the south here, south of Netilyovi. We come to Nevelsky, and there has been a change shown then on Syriac. Now, what he's showing is that actually just this paddock is this paddock just here. Nevelsky itself shows very similar between Deep State and Syriac of the amount of control, but in short, he's showing that this in here has then come under Russian control. Of course, not being shown on the map, so again, grain of salt. But on these maps, nowhere else is showing any changes. I just want to have a look while I'm here. Still some grey zones shown across on the left bank, but of course we saw then Krinky then fall here in the past couple of days, couple of weeks. Legends, look after yourself. I hope you're having a great day, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.